Program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hi, this is Dick Shanley, and for the next hour I will be reading from Sunday's December 14th issue of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And on the front page, it's a picture of an eagle with spears in its claws, and it says, overmatched. Chapter 1, America's military dominance is fading. Our rivals have noticed. President Xi Jinping of China has ordered his armed forces to be ready to seize Taiwan by 2027. Though the United States maintains a policy of strategic ambiguity of how to respond to an invasion, Republican and Democratic presidents alike have said that America would defend the island nation. The Pentagon has produced a classified multi-year assessment that shows how such a conflict would play out. The overmatch brief. The report is comprehensive view of U.S. military power, prepared by the Pentagon's Office of Net Assessment and delivered most recently to top White House officials in the last year. It catalogs China's ability to destroy American fighter planes, large ships, and satellites, and identify the U.S. military supply chain choke points. Its details have not been previously reported. The picture it paints is consistent and disturbing. Pete Hegseth, now the Secretary of Defense, said last year that in the Pentagon war games against China, we lose every time. When a senior Biden administration national security official received the overmatch brief in 2021, he turned pale as he realized that every trick we had up our sleeve, the Chinese had redundancy after redundancy, according to one of the official who was present. The assessment shows something more worrying than the potential outcome of war over Taiwan. It shows the Pentagon's over-reliance on expensive, vulnerable weapons as adversaries feel cheap, technological, advanced ones, and it traces a decades-long decline in America's ability to win a long war with a major power. War games can be wrong. Analysts sometimes overstate adversaries' abilities. Yet this larger point should not be ignored. Nearly 4 decades after victory in the Cold War, the U.S. military is ill-prepared for today's global threats and revolutionary technologies. It is an ancient and familiar pattern. Despite ample warnings, military and political leaders trained in one set of assumptions, tactics, and weapons failed to adapt to change. Whether it's the French army in 1940 stuck behind a defensive Maginot Line or Russian armored formations in Ukraine in 2022, decimated by Javelin missiles, the result is devastating for the side that will discard old concepts, adopt new weapons, or rethink its way of war. That's where the United States, excuse me, that's where the United States finds risk finding itself. The Trump administration wants to increase defense spending in 2026 to more than $1 trillion. Much of that money will be squandered on capabilities that do more to magnify our weakness than to sharpen our strength. The global The global consequences could be dire. The U.S. has not always used its military effectively or in just causes, yet a strong America has been crucial to a world in which freedom and prosperity are far more common than at nearly any other point in human history. Western Europe, Japan, and South Korea are all affluent democracies, thanks in part to American might. A world in which a totalitarian China achieves military superiority in Asia and Russia feels free to menace Europe would make Americans poor and threaten democracies everywhere. It is a prospect we should not act resolutely to prevent. We should act resolutely to prevent. In this special issue of Sunday Opinion, the editorial board examined what's gone wrong with the U.S. military, technologically, bureaucratically, culturally, politically, and strategically, and how we can create a relevant and effective force that can deter wars whenever possible and win them whenever necessary. The new reality has come into focus in many places, particularly in Ukraine since Russia invaded in 2022. Inventive Ukrainian forces neutralized the once formidable Russian Black Sea Fleet using small remote-controlled boats loaded with explosives. Many of Russia's most valuable heavy bomber aircraft were badly damaged or destroyed in June by small Ukrainian drones sneaking into the country and launched against bases as far away as Siberia. In eastern Ukraine, drones that typically cost a few $100s to make, in which the Ukrainian and Russian now produce by the millions, have transformed the battlefield into a mashup of All Quiet on the Western Front and Blade Runner, as the national security writer Max Boot observed. To see where American defense dollars go, consider America's latest aircraft carrier, the Gerald R.F. Ford, which is deployed for the first time in 22 after more than a decade of construction delays. The ship incorporates new technology, including advanced nuclear reactors and electromagnetic catapults for launching aircraft, which make it more efficient than a Nimitz-class aircraft it is intended to replace. The price tag, an estimated $13 billion. That figure is for a single ship. It does not include the billions of dollars worth of military aircraft carried by the Ford and the escort ships needed to defend it. Such formidable power is effective if we want to go to war against a relatively poor, weak country like, say, Venezuela. Yet the Ford, which is deployed in the Caribbean, is fatally vulnerable to new forms of attack. China in recent years has amassed an arsenal of around 600 hypersonic weapons, which can travel at 5 times the speed of sound and are more difficult to intercept. Other countries possess quiet diesel-electric submarines able to sink American carriers. In war games like those depicted in the Overmatch brief, ships like the Ford are often destroyed. Still, the Navy plans to build at least 9 additional Ford-class carriers in the coming decade. So far, the United States has yet to deploy a single hypersonic missile. Or take the possibility of Russian attack on a NATO member state such as Estonia. Evidence suggests that Moscow may already be testing ways to do this, including by cutting undersea cables of which NATO forces depend. And Russia is learning fast in the laboratory of war in Ukraine. This year, Kiev's forces captured a Russian drone made of commercially available parts that could navigate autonomously to a target akin to an off-the-shelf cruise missile. Nor is this our allies that are at risk. China has installed malware in the computer works and control power grids, communication systems, and water supplies for American military bases. The advanced cyber campaign carried out by the state-sponsored hacking group known as Volt Typhoon threatens the military ability to move weapons and forces in the event of a crisis in the Pacific and could affect civilians as well. America's cybersecurity officials have struggled to find and remove the malware. Why have successive administrations, Republican and Democratic, persisted in investing in the old way of war? One reason is inertia in Congress and the Pentagon. The channels through which funds flow to weapon systems are deep and difficult to reroute. An entrenched oligopoly of 5 large defense contractors, down from 51 in the early 90s, has an interest in selling Pentagon ever costlier evolutions of the same ships, planes, missiles. Another factor is military culture. Senior officials tend to be wedded to the knowledge and tactics in which they made their careers. When General David Berger, who was then the commander of the Marines, decided to get rid of the Corps' tanks, which are difficult to transport and maintain, for the sake of creating a lighter, more agile force that could better counter China, he had to overcome intense institutional resistance. General Berger was right. The war in Ukraine has shown how vulnerable tanks have become. There's also a conceptual failure, the idea that more sophisticated is always better. For decades, the American military has relied on systems that are bespoke, complex, wildly expensive. That made some sense back when our primary adversary, the Soviet Union, pursued a similar approach, allowing the West to spend it into the ground. The trouble with highly engineered and expensive weapons is that they are all but impossible to produce rapidly or purchase in large numbers. The Army wants to field its own small drones, not for a few $100 per unit as in Ukraine, but a more sophisticated version of the same for tens of thousands of dollars. Unsurprisingly, the more complex version takes much longer to produce. Traditional weapons such as military shells, ships, and aircraft will soon be crucial to future wars, but the U.S. defense industry lost the ability to produce them at scale and speed. In the event of a war with China, the United States would rapidly run out of essential munitions, as Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor in the Biden administration, has warned. The Pentagon reportedly expended about 1/4 of its overall stockpile of high-altitude missile, helping to defend Israel against Iran's ballistic missiles. And that was in a war that lasted just 12 days. 3 years into the war in Ukraine, the United States can't produce enough Patriot missiles to meet Kiev's demand. The American military has resisted change for decades. The Pentagon has not had a strong Secretary of Defense willing to impose tough choices since Robert Gates, who served both Bush and Obama, left the office in 2011. Ashton B. Carter, a defense secretary in the Obama administration and an early recipient of Overmatch Bill, instituted multiple pilot projects and experiments in service of reform at the Pentagon to limit effect. John McCain spent years raising the alarm on Capitol only to see Congress continue its support for outdated strategies. There are some signs that the current administration may be willing to change. The Army has canceled the unsafe and unreliable M10 Booker light tank and other pragmatic programs. The White House is pushing for an overhaul of the way it buys weapons, but Mr. Hegseth has presided mainly over management crisis, officer purges, and intelligence leaks that in a normal administration would have forced his resignation. President Trump's use of the armed force for domestic deployment and illegal anti-drug mission is not the kind of change we need. Transformation is a long-term endeavor. The chaotic first months of the Trump second term have shown the dangers of misusing the military. This also has distracted from the urgency of reform. The strategic challenge the United States forces, among them a rising China, revanchist Russian, and an A1-generated cyber threats and the bio threats, will outlast this administration. While none can be defended by force alone, they still require capable U.S. military power as a backstop to international order and security of the free world. In the short term, the transformation of the American military may require additional spending, primarily to rebuild our industrial base. As a share of the economy, defense spending, about 3.4% of gross domestic products, remain near its lowest level in more than 80 years, even after Mr. Trump's recent increases. A more secure world will almost certainly require more military commitment from allies like Canada, Japan, and Europe, which have long relied on American taxpayers to bankroll their production. China's industrial capacity can be met only by pooling the resources of allies and partners around the world who balance and contain Beijing's increasingly influence. Ultimately, a stronger U.S. national security depends less on enormous new budgets than on wiser investments. Spending heavily on traditional symbols of might risks shortchanging the true sources of American strength. Relentless innovation, rapid adaptability, and a willingness to discard old assumptions. To be clear, the United States needs a stronger military primarily to deter future wars, not to start them. As we rebuild our military, we must pursue diplomacy with our adversaries. At the same time, we need to prepare for the worst. Deterring war is the first goal of any successful strategy to avoid protracted conflict, and we need to address our weaknesses before the enemies look to exploit them. Mr. Trump and his administration have received latest warnings of the overmatched brief. The need for change is urgent. The question is whether we will do it in time. This is the future of war. Something strange happened at the meeting between President Biden and President Xi Jinping of China in a mansion south of San Francisco on November 15th of 2023. After a working lunch, as the two leaders rose to leave, an aide to Mr. Xi signaled to one of the Chinese president's bodyguards, who approached the table, took a small bottle out of his pocket and quickly sprayed down every surface that Mr. Xi had touched, including what remained of the almond meringue cake on the dessert plate. Editorial comment, this is the stuff we don't hear about. The purpose of the American concluded was to remove any trace of Mr. Xi's DNA that the host might collect and exploit. This is a wayward thinking, said an official who attended the meeting, that you could design a disease that would only affect one person. To the handful of U.S. officials who were there, it was a sobering coda to an otherwise successful summit. Even as Beijing and Washington pursue diplomacy, the pace of technological change is deepening suspicion and fear between the two sides. Human history can be told as a series of advances in warfare, from chariots to crossbows to nuclear-tipped missiles, and we are learning through maybe the fastest advancement in weaponry ever. Ask any five-year veteran security experts, and you will hear about 5 different emerging technologies with the potential to change the world of combat. Swarms of robotic aircraft that work in unison to find and kill targets without any human oversight. Advanced cyber weapons that can immobilize armed forces and shut down electrical grids. AI-designed BL weapons engineered to kill only those with certain genetic characteristics. Oh. Some of these weapons will remain confined to the pages of science fiction, but others are already in the works. Innovations in artificial intelligence, synthetic biology, and quantum computing are set to change how we wage war just as they transform the aspects of our life. The United States has the lead in some areas, especially in AI, thanks to the huge investments of the private sector, but China, Russia, and other authoritarian regimes are accelerating state investments in purpose-built universities and finding ways to incorporate innovations into their military now. Keeping pace in these 21st century arms races require political will and national coordination between the public and private sectors and research institutions. The Pentagon must embrace technological change and incorporate it into recruiting, training, and strategies. Congress needs to expand funds for research and development and technologies with military applications. The president needs to reverse his administration's war on universities and bring private industry into the mission. It wouldn't be the first time the country rallied to stay ahead of innovative military adversaries. America's science was behind Germany's before World War II began, but it surged ahead and ultimately won the war in the large part thanks to victory in the cutting-edge scientific race to develop atomic weaponry. Crucial to the effect was the collaboration among American government officials, academic researchers, and private companies. The need for collaboration is particularly acute in AI, which is a rare example of a technology with profound national security implications and was developed not by the government, by the private sector. Congress and the courts must vigorously oversee public-private collaborations to ensure it serves the public interest and that of the company of administrations. America must also be aware of the dangers of an unchecked arms race. The world learned in the last century that powerful weapons are sometimes best kept at bay through treaties, and the United States should join other countries in arms control before new and dangerous technologies are ready to be used. Deterrence will be necessary. The biggest reason to build a military that can win the wars of the future is to prevent those wars from ever happening. It is to signal to American rivals and enemies that an attack on the U.S. and its allies is too costly to launch. We urge the leaders of both parties, President Trump, members of Congress, and Democrats considering campaigns for the White House in 2028, to recognize the threat in front of us. America's national security establishment scrambling to adapt the coming world of warfare, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, which collects and analyzes much of the Pentagon space-based intelligence, leads one effort developing America's military AI targeting system, synthesizing a constant high-volume stream of data from satellites, spy planes, and other sensors. The agent's imagery analysis program called MAVEN identifies projects faster than the army of humans who once pored over grainy computer and images in both threats. MAVEN is now in every major U.S. military command headquarter world. It has suggested targets in Iraq, Syria, and Yemen that U.S. forces have subsequently destroyed, and has produced intelligence that Ukraine has used to strike Russian targets. The program can identify military objects like rocket launchers, advancing troop formations, and docked battleships, and spots and tag objects on a no-strike list, including hospitals, schools, and religious buildings. The National Geospatial Intelligence Agency has testified to Congress that these algorithms, fed with new intelligence data every day, gets faster and more reliable to use. The software-driven approach to warfare is forcing the Pentagon to turn to the private sector for help. Palantir, a data analytics company and co-founder in 2023 by the billionaire libertarian Peter Thiel and Alex Karp, its chief executive, is the largest wave of new tech-heavy contractors. The company takes intelligence data from entries like the National Geospatial Intelligence, integrates it with other information and presents in a program called Maven Smart System, and military intelligence officers who use daily on classified networks worldwide. Palantir's success at working with the government has made it one of the most prominent businesses, pushing the Department of Defense to adapt new ways of working with Silicon Valley. In November, a smaller startup, Android, founded by the Oculus inventor Palmer Luckey, won an Army contract to provide AI-powered drone defense program. The company's software is designed to organize information from radars and direction systems so that humans can target and destroy enemy drones faster and more effective. On October 31st, over the Mojave Desert, the company flew a dart-shaped drone called Fury in its first AI-controlled flight. The Pentagon hopes eventually a field of 1,000 robotic wingmen that will fly alongside traditional fighter jets into battle with the ability to dogfight with other aircraft, perform reconnaissance, and conduct electronic warfare. America's adversaries are pursuing their own advances. China has released video footage of what appears to be a robot wingman being tested in flight. Ukraine's forces have captured a Russian drone that could fly dozens of miles, identify and lock in the targets, then plunge into a nosedive and deliver 6 pounds of explosives to blow up the target, apparently all without any human guidance. Built with off-the-shelf parts, the V2U, as it is known, costs a fraction of its American and Chinese counterparts. Not all high-tech is smart tech. For decades, the U.S. has reflectively opted for cutting-edge bespoke weaponry that years to perfect rather than buying simple, commercially reliable equipment. America's nuclear fight plane, the F-35 Lightning II, can see other fighters before they see it and destroy them with advanced guided missiles. The pilot's helmet alone costs about $400,000, but all that G-Wizardly can break, and often it does, which has caused the plane to spend more time undergoing maintenance in hangars than in the air. Much of America's vulnerability stems from its reliance on expensive, exquisite systems. Everything from sensors that track enemy ships, aircraft, and missiles to the ability of commanders to coordinate now relies on delicate, poorly defended space-based system. China has built a military capable of disrupting those networks using cyber weapons and missiles. This is their theory of victory, the former Deputy Secretary Bob Work said in 2021. Every single nuclear communication system we have is covered by a Chinese jammer. They do all sorts of cyber intrusions, and they put them all under one commander, and the commander just looks at the battle network and says, how can I break it apart? The hardest question for the U.S. in figuring out how to respond to such challenges isn't whether to pursue our own weapons that can deter and defeat them, but how to do it safely and ethically. Turning over decision-making to robots can threaten civilians. Israel has mixed traditional and new warfare tactics over the last 2 years in fighting Hezbollah and Iran. Its use of A1-enabled surveillance systems in Gaza to suggest human targets have been controversial. The systems have reportedly misidentified civilians as combatants and resulted in the deaths of innocent people. The dangers go beyond the traditional battlefield. Experts warn that an advancement in AI could usher in a new era of bioterrorism, with basic coding knowledge, a laptop program to comb through open source databases and find ways to fine-tune viruses to make them spread faster and be more deadly. Groups with specific genetic characteristics or individual species of farm animals could be targeted. This year, two major companies, OpenAI and Anthropic, warn that if nothing is done, AI would soon be able to assist bad actors attempting to create bioweapons. Students at MIT use chatbots to come up with 4 pandemic pathogens. The AI explained how to generate them from synthetic DNA. It suggested that companies that weren't likely to screen ores for DNA, and it recommended that if students lacked the skills to do all this, this could contact a research organization. This was done in 1 hour. The Biden administration imposed multiple safety concerns on A1 development and use, including by the military. Mr. Trump reversed some of the steps and replaced them with its own direct-to-revoke barriers to innovation. The Pentagon intends to expand its use of AI intelligence analysis and combat in the coming months, a top official told the defense conference earlier this month. The AI future is not going to be won by hand-wringing about safety, said Vice President J.D. Vance at a summit in Paris in February. The world is unprepared for what's coming and what's already here. As the wars of the 20th century showed, deference alone is often not enough to prevent the use of new weapons. The U.S. needs to negotiate, sign treaties to limit where these weapons are used. We joined the United Nations Secretary General and the International Committee in their call for a new treaty to be concluded by 2026 on autonomous weapons systems. This should include limits on the types of targets, such as outlawing their use in situations where civilians or civilian objects are present, and requirements for human-machine interaction, notably to ensure effective human supervision and timely intervention and deactivation. At the least, the administration should push comprehensive requirements that companies that sell equipment used to make biological agents verify who their customers are to the nature of their work. The White House should call for a biological weapons convention, a 50-year-old treaty with about 190 states participating, to be amended to address the technological advances underway. The U.S. should end its self-defeating war on universities and return to long-term investing in the technology of the future through grants or research and development. Should also expand the best it makes, large and small, in private industry's nascent technologies like autonomous drones. Finally, the U.S. should tighten export countries on advanced AI chips to ensure they don't find their way to adversarial nations. Mr. Trump's decision announced last week to allow the sale to some of the world's most powerful chips to China is a mistake. From Ukraine's battlefield to Mr. Zine's apparent post-lunch bioweapons defense, it's clear that America's oceans long bulwarks against foreign enemies can't protect us, that an adversary uses AI as part of a total war against the U.S. The speed of warfare will soon outpace human abilities to control it, said Andrew C. Weber, the Pentagon official in charge of nuclear, chemical, and biological defense programs under President Barack Obama. To counter the growing threat, America must simultaneously win the race to build autonomous weapons that lead the world in controlling them. An editorial comment, reading about the sophistication of this weaponry. I'm a golden oldie, and it's really difficult to comprehend. America can't make what it needs for defense. 2020, the Navy had a simple plan to build its next fleet of small warships, the Constellation class. Take a European design and build it in America. But the Navy's constant changes complicated the project. Shipbuilders and supply chain couldn't keep up. By 2025, the Navy had overhauled 85% of the original design and still wasn't final. In November 25, the military canceled the entire project. It cost $3.5 billion and produced 0 ships. Let me read that again. On November 25th, the military canceled the entire project. It cost $3.5 billion and produced 0 ships. Another editorial comment, that's pretty frightening. We spent $3.5 billion on a lost leader while we have homeless people and people struggle week to week. Something wrong with the story. The Consul is just the latest in a string of American shipbuilding failures. Over the past 35 years, the Navy has commissioned more than half a dozen new kinds of ships, from small combat vessels to large destroyers. Nearly all of them have flopped, running billions of dollars over budget and years behind schedule and failing to perform as promised, leaving the military relying on a fleet of design largely in the Reagan era. Recent efforts to build fighter and bomber aircraft have similarly disappointed. It takes an average 12 years to produce a war-ready jet, ship, or tank, and the Air Force is retiring planes faster than they can replace them. America's defense industry, like so much of its economy, has lost the ability to build quickly and effectively. This has left the United States at risk of falling behind China, which has embarked on one of the largest peacetime military expansions in history. Beijing now operates the world's largest navy with over 370 ships, compared with America's 296. It has several types of ship-killing hypersonic missiles, while the U.S. has deployed none. Most of all, China is making all of this at speed. It produces more than 3 warships for every one the U.S. makes, and nearly 200 commercial ships for every American boat. Rebuilding U.S. defense industry base is crucial to preventing and winning wars. If America can't make what it needs to prevail in a long war lasting months or years, its adversaries are more likely to attack as the military maxim goes. Industrial might is deterrence.
So we'll enjoy your time up there and have a happy Christmas. Yeah, very good. Have a good time.
America needs to reinvest in building military hardware. It spends about 3.4% of its gross domestic product on defense, down from nearly 5% in 2010 and 9.4% in 1967. Spending half a percentage point more, about $150 billion on manufacturing, would be a major effort to rebuild our industrial base. More importantly, though, it's whom the Defense Department is buying weapons from. The defense industry is consolidated from 51 major players in the early 90s to 5. Lockheed Martin, RTX, formerly Raytheon, General Dynamics, Northrop, and Boeing. Partly as a result, the U.S. supply chain has withered as smaller machine shops that make key components, submarines, and aircrafts have gone out of business. Those 5 big contractors, known as the primes, have built their business around government contracts. They have become masters of bureaucracy, but are incapable of churning out weapons quickly, a fundamental requirement in modern warfare. As we have seen in Ukraine, the mass production of off-the-shelf drones has countered high-priced weapons like tanks and helicopters. Ukraine immobilized Russia's formidable Black Sea Fleet in part with remote-controlled speedboats laden with explosives. Larger companies must adapt to the speed of modern conflict, while smaller ones need a chance to get in the game. The government should place bets on innovative startups rather than defaulting to the slow, costly primes. President Trump is pushing a Golden Fleet initiative to develop new classes of warships, including unmanned vessels, to imitate Ukraine's success. The Navy's 2026 budget calls for spending aggressively on unarmed systems, including billions of dollars for the air, surface, and underwater drones. How the Navy plans to achieve all this after its failures in many is anyone's guess. The government efforts to diversification and innovate have mostly shown how bad things have gotten and how far we still have to go. America had more than 300 commercial shipyards in 1980, and produced dozens of ships every year. Federal subsidies allowed the industry to compete with shipyards in countries with lower manufacturing. President Ronald Reagan canceled the subsidies in the early 80s. The American shipyards lost private sector customers. Tens of thousands of workers lost their jobs. U.S. shipbuilding collapsed. 40 years later, the Constellation project ran into the reality. Initially, the Navy's approach seemed smart. Instead of building a ship from scratch, it would use a proven design for a frigate already in service with the French and Italian navies. To build, the Pentagon chose Marinette Marine, a Wisconsin-based shipyard owned by the Italian company Fincantieri. What began as a quick and low whisk to get what the Navy needed, however, turned into another sad example of American industrial dysfunction. The Pentagon ordered new weapons and equipment for the ship, including a different electric propulsion propeller and design generator. The growing list of changes required workforce and supply chain flexibility. A shortage of machinists, welders, pipe fitters, electricians, and other tradesmen added cost and delay. With no end in sight, the Navy canceled the program in November. A week after the Navy's announcement, Fincantieri Marine laid off 93 workers. Fixing America's industrial decline is in the wake of a generation, but we don't have time to wait when it comes to national security. Adding back shipping subsidies is a start, and the government has begun to do so. Over the past decade, the Pentagon has spent nearly $6 billion to strengthen the industrial industry. Companies are taking steps to build their workforce by forging partnerships with technical colleges and established training academics. Shipyards are offering bonuses. Congress should expand these programs. It should also pass the Bipartisan Shipbuilding and Harbor Infrastructure and Prosperity and Security for America Act, which aims to expand the U.S. flag fleet by 250 ships within a decade by investing in yards and requiring more international trade travel on American vessels. Government subsidies aren't enough, however. The Navy has spent $700 billion on shipbuilding since the early 1990s, yet the size of its fleet has declined by 45% over the time. The Pentagon needs to tap into the dynamism of the broader American economy beyond the prime if it is going to make tomorrow's weapons at the needed scale. Traditional Defense Department supporters accounted for 85% of the major program spending in 2024. So far, the Pentagon's efforts to diversify where it buys weapons have underwhelmed. The Replicator program, which sought to buy thousands of cheap aerial parts and maritime drones, within 2 years failed to achieve its goals. It is led by Defense Innovation Unit, which aims to bring commercial technology into the armed forces. It has been hampered by limited decision-making power, spotty funding, and regulations. The so-called valley of death between concept and production is a major barrier. Too often, Defense Department seed funding for research and development dries up before it risks spending real money on programs. From 2001 to 2016, about 40% of new companies competed for government contracts out of the running. After a decade, 80% had abandoned trying to work with the government. The 2,000 pages of regulations for companies seeking federal contracts further favor the primes, with their armies of lawyers and former government weapons buyers. Companies built to compete in America's dynamic commercial markets don't have the time or resources to master the Byzantine art of government acquisition. The Pentagon should relax its rules for buying weapons to clear the way for younger companies. The Trump administration deserves credit for several moves addressing the defense industry's shortcomings. It has announced the investments in shipbuilding and drone manner, and in November, Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, ordered a sweeping reform of how and from whom the Pentagon will buy weapons. Either you work, companies, or industry, or defense industry, deliver or we fail, he told weapons makers on November 7th. It is literally life or death. The administration's messaging is on target, but it's an open question as to whether it can follow through. Even if the moves are successful, the United States will need to collaborate with other countries to keep pace with China. The largest of being state-owned shipbuilding delivered more than 200 ships last year. Collectively can carry more than all the ships that U.S. shipbuilders have produced since the end of World War II. In extraordinary cases, the government should force weapons makers to produce more of what they need, particularly munitions, long-range missiles, and air defense interceptors, through invoking the Defense Production Act. The benefit of these changes will extend far beyond national defense. Military production has been a long history of spillover economic advantages. Many American industries, such as aviation, satellites, robotics, radar, microwave technology, and Silicon Valley, existed either partly thanks to military research and production. A bigger, stronger, and more efficient defense industry can make America both safer and more prosperous. We need a new definition of service. Bailey Bombach knew she wanted to serve her country when she graduated from Notre Dame in 2021. Miss Bombach, 26-year-old from Novi, Michigan, didn't enlist in the military, however. She enrolled in a business school at the University of California, Berkeley. Miss Bombach is part of a growing community in the Bay Area what aims to bring high-tech dynamism to the humbling world of the military, to the lumbering world of the military. As social media companies and countless lifestyle startups have lost their luster in recent years, entrepreneurs have been drawn to defense tech by a mix of motivation, influx of venture capitalists, a coolness factor, and the startup ethicals, which Ms. Bombach described as a relentless pursuit of building things. There's also something deeper, old-fashioned patriotism. March with a career that serves a greater purpose. In college, Ms. Bombach watched her father, a Ford Motor Company executive, lead the company sprint to produce COVID-19 ventilators and personal protective equipment for frontline healthcare workers. I've never been more inspired by how private sectors can have so much impact for public sector good, she said. Ford's intervention during the COVID pandemic harked back to a time when public-private partnerships were commonplace. During World War II, leaders of America's biggest companies, including Ford, halted business as usual to manufacture weapons for the war effort. For much of the 20th century, the private and public sectors were tightly woven together. 1980, nearly 1 in 5 Americans were veterans. By 2022, that figure had shrunk to 1 in 16. Though in the 1980s, about 70% of the companies doing business with the Pentagon were also leaders in the broader U.S. economy. That's down to less than 10% today. The shift away from widespread American participation in national security has left the Department of Defense isolated from two of the country's great assets, its entrepreneurial skill and technological expertise. Recent changes in Silicon Valley are bringing down those walls. Venture capitalists pouring money into defense tech. Annual investment is up from $7 billion in 2015 to $80 billion in 2025. The Pentagon needs to seize the opportunity to find ways to accelerate its work with startups and skilled workers, with private sector. It should expand the definition of what it means to serve and provide more flexible options, those willing to step in. The military will always need physically fit service members, but we are headed toward a future in which software will play a bigger role in armed conflict than hardware. From unmanned drones and AI-driven targeting to highly engineered cyber weapons and space-based systems, these missions will be carried out by service members in temperature-controlled rooms rather than by well-armed troops, braving the physical challenge of the front line. For the latent opportunity in Silicon Valley and beyond, the Trump administration has been uneven in embracing the moment. Stephen Feinberg, the Deputy Secretary of Defense, is a Wall Street billionaire who is expanding the Pentagon's ties with business. Pete Hegseth, Secretary of State, and his warrior ethos and exclusionary recruitment have set back the efforts to build a military for the future. America has a chance to reshape our armed forces for the conflict ahead, and we have the very good fortune of being able to do that in peacetime. Elias Rosenfeld had been at Stanford for only a month and a half, but he already looked right at home at a job for student interest in pursuing defense tech on the breezy campus recently, standing in relaxed posture, wearing a beaded bracelet and a sweater adorned with a single sunflower. Rather than use his time in Stanford prestigious business school to build a fintech app or wellness brand, Mr. Rosenfeld has set up sights on helping rebuild the industrial base on which America's military relies. It's a crucial mission for a country that is getting outbuilt by China. Mr. Rosenfeld brings a unique commitment to it. Born in Venezuela, he came to the U.S. at age 6 and draws his patriotism from the latter country's experience with tyranny and his Jewish heritage. Without a strong, resilient America, I may not be here today, Mr. Rosenfeld says. Working in industrial renewal, he says, it's way to start delivering as a country so folks can feel more inclined and passionate and to be more patriotic. Not on Mr. Roosevelt's agenda enlisting the military. In an early era, he might have been tempted by a wider suite of options for service. In 1955, the U.S. government nearly doubled the maximum size of the military ready reserve force, from 1.5 to 2.9 million, in part by giving young men the chance to spend 6 months in active duty training. Today, the U.S. ready reserve number is just over 1 million. Other countries provide a model for strengthening the reserves. In Sweden, the military selects the top 5% or so of 18-year-old eligible to serve in the active military for up to 15 months, followed by membership in the reserve for 10 years. The model is so effective that recruits compete for spots, and according to the Wall Street Journal, former conscripts are headhunted by civil service and prized by tech companies. America's leaders have argued for generations that the military's volunteer model is superior to conscription of delivering a well-prepared force. The challenge of maintaining recruiting and getting the right service members for every mission. There are some examples of the Pentagon successfully luring new high-tech recruits. Since last year, top college students have been training to meet the government's growing need for skilled cyber security. The Cyber Service Academy, a scholarship for service program, covers the full cost of tuition and educational expenses in exchange for a period of civilian employment. The best incentive for enlisting may have been nothing to do with service, but with career opportunities that are promised afterwards. It was a foregone conclusion that Lee Kantowski would become an Army officer. One of his favorite high school teachers had served, and his hometown, Lawton, Oklahoma, was a military town, a place where enlisting was commonplace. Mr. Kantowski attended West Point And in the 8 years after graduating, went on tours across the world. Now he's getting an MBA at Berkeley and has co-founded a defense tech club with Bambuk there and works part-time as a startup building guidance device in the turn dumb bombs into smart ones. The military needs recruits like Mr. Kantowski who want to support defense in and out of uniform. And nearly 1 million people who work for the Department of Defense are civilians, supplemented by a similar number of contractors. Both paths could be expanded. A rotating door approach carries some risk to military cohesion and readiness. The armed forces are not just another job. Soldier has to put themselves in danger's way, even outside combat zones. America still needs the men and women who are willing to sign up for traditional tours of beauty, for traditional tours of duty. You have been listening to a reading of articles and features from Sunday, December 2014 issue of the New York Times. An editorial comment, I'm sorry in a way that the Times came out with this war issue during the holiday season where everybody should be happy and not thinking of the world at war. So on that note, I hope you have a happy holiday filled with peace and happiness, health, and joy. Your reader has been Dick Shanley. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have a reading of the New York Times Arts and Leisure section, followed at 4 by a rebroadcast of this morning's Buffalo News. Please stay for these readings and more throughout the day, and feel free to contact us with your comments, suggestions, with any questions you may have. following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision,